Welcome to Talk the Walk. I'm Sarah Wong. The Asia-Pacific region, home to China and India, generates more than half of the world's carbon emissions. In Hong Kong, the government has outlined its vision to cut emissions in half by 2035 and to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. That's a more ambitious goal than mainland China's, but some scientists are still lamenting that there seems to be a lack of urgency in significantly reducing emissions between now and the end of this decade. Today, we're joined by Gill Meller, the Legal and Governance Director of Hong Kong's largest public transport operator, the MTR Corporation, to talk about their efforts in turning and keeping Hong Kong green. Gill, thank you very much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Sarah.
Now, MTR Corporation received a special recognition for innovation and its sustainability initiative last month. Now, according to the chief executive's latest policy address, transportation only accounted for 18% for Hong Kong's carbon emissions, while electricity generation accounted for 66%. So my question is, how significant is the role of MTR in helping Hong Kong to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050?
Thank you. So in Hong Kong's government's new climate action plan, it stated that rail will be the backbone of public transport in Hong Kong. And indeed, one of the largest contributions that we make is taking traffic off the roads because people can take the MTR. And so going forward, we have a number of new projects in our portfolio that we hope through those will continue to contribute towards Hong Kong green efforts. And actually, our largest emissions do come from the electricity that we use to power the trains. Having said that, so that the supply side grid decarbonisation is very important, but we're also making our own efforts to decarbonise our company in line with the Hong Kong government's goals of carbon neutrality by 2050.
Can you tell us more about the projects that you guys have right now to achieve carbon neutrality?
Sure. So we're currently undertaking a decarbonisation study, as a result of which we will hopefully be able to set ourselves ambitious short-term science-based targets in line with the Paris Agreement. And we've got a few projects on hand at the moment. One is to replace all of the chillers that support our air conditioning system. So we've replaced 150 to date, and that will drive down our energy usage. We're also looking at the use of LED lights. And we do something called regenerative braking, which is basically as trains brake, you can capture that kinetic energy and turn it back into electrical energy that you can put back in the system for following trains to use. So there's a lot of projects we've got on hand.
Interesting. And talk about chillers, immediately think about the freezing conditions somewhere in the MTR. So we're hoping to see a change in that in the future. Now, I know that one of your projects and partnerships also in regard to the environmental campaign is to partner with Carbonless Asia to introduce a challenge in a bid to further pursue sustainability. Can you tell us more about that?
Sure. So I met Tony last summer and he introduced me to the Carbonless platform. And of course, we don't have all the answers to our decarbonisation journey ourselves. So we were keen to reach out and see whether there may be any startups or technological solutions that we could use to help us along our decarbonisation journey. And so we ran the Carbonless Asia Challenge over the second half of last year. And we had a closing ceremony just before Christmas at which 5 startups presented their ideas to us. And I think Tony's going to talk a little bit later about the winning startup and the idea that they have.
So what is the biggest challenge you wish to address in achieving sustainability?
Gosh, so for us, we reset our sustainability strategy in 2020. I think as a public transport operator, sustainability has always been a part of our DNA, but we realised that we needed to be a little bit more strategic in our approach. And so when we reset our corporate strategy, our board set not only financial objectives for us, but social and environmental objectives. And we identified 3 key focus areas, which we think are both material to our business, but are also material to the Hong Kong society. And one of those is GHG emission reductions. So the challenge for us is really, given our high electricity usage, how can we move down that decarbonisation journey? And of course, given the nature of our business with assets which are pretty expensive and last for a long time, is the investment that's going to be required to take us down that journey.
I see. And I also noticed that in your part of your carbonization strategy, it also included installation of solar panel in some of the MTR stations and properties. And I think it brings us to a very crucial question regarding to decarbonization and energy transition is how do you ensure the efficiency of energy transition and also at the same time without, over-reliant on renewable energy so that the electricity price do not fluctuate as much?
Yes, so obviously the decarbonisation of the grid is very important to us, but we have installed solar panels on a number of our facilities. So one of our stations, Hinkang Station, which is a kind of model for future green stations for us, also on our headquarters building, and interestingly as a trial on one of our light rail vehicles. Now, unfortunately, the amount of electricity that's generated by that is only sufficient to power the lighting of the light rail vehicle, as opposed to actually the operation of the light rail vehicle. But certainly, we're trying to see are there other places within our network where we could use this approach and install more solar panels, which we then work in partnership with the electricity companies, so that electricity actually goes back into the grid, and as you suggest, shouldn't have a huge impact on electricity prices.
I see. Now, circling back to your partnership with Carbonless Asia, it's obviously one of the examples of corporation cooperating with environmental organization to achieve goals in sustainability. I was wondering, how do you view the leadership and the roles that corporates can play in Hong Kong and also Asia Pacific region to achieve environmental goals?
I think corporates have a critical role to play, and in lots of ways, they're the only organisations, I think, that have the resources, the creativity, the innovation to deal with some of these big issues, such as climate change. So while government clearly has its role to play in terms of setting regulation, in terms of looking at issues like carbon trading, I think it's absolutely beholden on companies to do their bit. And it was great to be able to reach out to these startup companies through the Carbonless Asia Challenge and see some of the really interesting ideas they've got that will actually help us on our journey.
So like MTR is we know that it's a mobility operator. And as you mentioned before, some of the emissions are resulted from the electricity generated by your vehicles. I was wondering, what about other types of corporates, like financial corporates, like banks, Goldman Sachs, and what they can do on their part to contribute to sustainable development?
So I think they can look at their own operations, although clearly their emissions would be a lot lower than a company like ours. But where they can also help is looking into that whole area of green finance. And indeed, MTR's had a sustainable finance framework for a number of years now. And last year, we issued one of the largest single tranche green bonds in Asia. And so certainly, I think the financial sector has a role to play in green finance and in financing energy transitions for companies.
Okay, well, I'm gonna ask some question that's in context with our environment right now, especially when we're in Hong Kong bracing for a looming fifth wave of the coronavirus. I was wondering, is there any obstacles in the era of the COVID pandemic that will compromise the company's pursuit in sustainability in any ways? Or on the other hand, maybe prompted the company to better adapt to the changing environment and different conditions?
So I think my personal view, COVID has shone a spotlight on a number of environmental and social issues, whether that's by the fact of there being less business travel, for example, over this period of time, but also I think socially in terms of issues like key workers, in terms of employment support during times when people were working from home or perhaps had to be laid off. So I think certainly from our perspective, COVID has really shone a spotlight on these issues. But for us as a public transport operator, it has given rise to some particular concerns or issues we've had to address, such as cleanliness of our stations and trains, so that people can feel safe when they're travelling on the MTR. And indeed, we worked in partnership with a company last year to develop hydrogen peroxide robots that would go on the train and spray the chemicals around the train compartments to make sure that all those very difficult to reach areas were covered by the cleaning chemicals, and also that our staff didn't have to spend so much time actually dealing with the chemicals themselves. So it's really driven innovation, I would say, within MTR in terms of us coming up with solutions as to how we can keep Hong Kong and the other cities in which we operate moving during these very challenging times, because people always need the MTR, and the key workers certainly need the MTR to enable them to get to work.
Has the reduction of passenger numbers during some of the lockdown period, not lockdown, but where restrictions are strict, kind of also reduced the amount of emissions generated by MTR vehicles?
It would depend on how you measure them, because if you measure them per car kilometre or per passenger, so certainly if we've been able to reduce train service, then that would have an impact on our emissions. But interestingly, we see that actually domestic patronage in Hong Kong has largely come back. We may see a different situation in the next few weeks if this fifth wave materialises.
Right. So last question I have for you, Gill, before I let you go. I noticed that there's some safety issues, safety events that occurred at the later part of last year. So I was wondering, how likely are challenges in other aspects of MTR's operation, such as safety issues, for example, undercut efforts to pursue or advance the company's green development?
So I think safety for us is a core part of our sustainability efforts. Under our head of social inclusion, we look at the concept of universal basic mobility, and the fact that in lots of ways the biggest contribution we can make to Hong Kong is providing a safe, affordable, accessible transport system for everybody. And so I don't see these things as being in conflict at all. We see safety as a key part of our sustainability efforts, but focusing on that won't mean that we'll take our eyes off the ball from an environmental perspective.
All right, Gill, thank you very much today for talking to us. Stay safe and please come back.
Thanks, Sarah. Stay well.
Talk to all. We'll be back in a moment. Stay with us.